their offensive, edging deeper into Russia.
You can see devastation here with cars that were in this car park. Over here as well, there's more ruins of more vehicles.
Also ahead, an iconic landmark in flames, out how over 100 firefighters tackled a fire inside Somerset House in London. Scientists warn that the new strain of Mpox is likely to already be in the UK. We hear from one man who says the disease nearly killed him. A handshake and an apology. What happened when the organiser of a protest which turned violent met a Muslim man who had to hide in a mosque? Plus, Liverpool begin the post-Klopp era with a win on the opening weekend of the new Premier League season. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. A deal is edging closer than ever before. The words of Joe Biden, the ceasefire talks continue to try and bring an end to the war in Gaza. Well, that claim tonight is disputed by a senior leader of Hamas, who has told Sky News that America is exaggerating any progress to avoid any further escalation. Well, the president's remarks come after at least 10 people were killed and 5 others injured in an Israeli airstrike in southern Lebanon. From Beirut, our special correspondent Alex Crawford has our top story.
Another family in Gaza obliterated by an Israeli airstrike. Nearly 20 people from one family, 8 of them children, 4 of them women. Unrelenting misery, never-ending grief, in an area where civilians thought they were safe, but where the Israelis say Hamas fighters were operating. Palestinian doctors insist otherwise and say the large number of child victims is a tragically high price to pay. Hours before the strike, the Israeli military had ordered the area and others in Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis to be evacuated, sparking mass fear and panic. The so-called safe zones in Gaza are now just 11% of the strip. Across the Israeli border in southern Lebanon, there was more Israeli devastation, this time an apartment housing workers and a young Syrian family, including 2 toddlers. 10 people were killed, another 6 wounded. The official Israeli line is the adjacent warehouse was storing a munitions factory operated by the Lebanese Hezbollah group. Not so, the owner told us. He says his business supplies construction material.
They've just killed innocent people and destroyed a civilian house and a business that's got nothing to do with the situation in this region.
As the owner's talking to reporters and villagers, more Israeli jets can be heard flying overhead, causing some alarm. Sorry. What is it? What is it? What is it? We're hearing that we're not sure what's going on, but there's certainly jets above us. This is really going to raise the tension once more, and they're asking us to leave now. Pictures from the Israeli military show a fairly substantial strike on the Lebanese house and business. All this as the world leaders urged restraint and talked up the possibility of a ceasefire deal. Hezbollah released a glossy propaganda video appearing to show tunnels cut into rock and missiles being prepared, along with a voiceover from the group's leader vowing revenge against Israel. Exactly what the ceasefire talks are trying to prevent: retaliation by Hezbollah and Iran for twin assassinations that they blame on Israel. But the most senior Hamas representative in Lebanon told us any deal was still way off, and he blamed the Israelis and the Americans.
Biden is just trying to give a positive impression, but the first round came with no improvements. The mediators told us the points we disagree on haven't been solved, and Netanyahu has added yet more conditions and made it even more complicated.
Israel keeps on saying that it's Hamas who is objecting to certain key things in the peace deal that's been drawn up, that it's Hamas who is adding conditions. Given that you're not at the talks, I mean, they seem to have a better grasp of what's going on, perhaps.
No one believes Netanyahu. Hamas accepted Biden's previous proposal and the UN Security Council decision, and yet in every case Netanyahu is refusing to agree and putting up obstacles.
There are 40,000 people dead now, more than 40,000 people dead in Gaza alone. Is it even possible to try to get a pause, at least in the fighting, to give people some respite?
Hamas has done everything to reach a deal to stop this war, but it's Israel who's carrying it on, who's insisting on committing crimes, and the Americans are supporting them whilst the world just watches it all. We don't want the war to stop only temporarily and on Israeli terms, so they take back their hostages and then just carry on committing massacres afterwards. We want a permanent ceasefire because that's what benefits our people most. And it's our people who are telling us not to accept a deal without a permanent ceasefire.
The Israeli foreign minister told his British and French counterparts that he expected his allies to take part in military action should the Islamic Republic and Hezbollah attack them, as the leaders have promised. Israel insists it's Hamas who's refusing to sign a deal. Mediators are trying to find common ground before the talks resume towards the end of next week. The killing continues unabated in Gaza, with no certainty that a promise of a deal without substantial progress will be enough to stave off attacks, which could tip the region into a more widespread war. Alex Crawford, Sky News in Lebanon.
And tonight, at least 2 people are known to have died following an Israeli airstrike on the West Bank. An IDF spokesperson claims the targets were a terrorist squad in the city of Jenin. It comes just 2 days after a mob of Israeli settlers targeted the town of Jeet, killing 1 person and setting fire to homes. Crazy Russian propaganda. That is how President Volodymyr Zelensky described Russian claims his country plans to use dirty bombs and attack nuclear power plants. Now, fighting is ongoing both in Ukraine and Russia as Moscow struggles to contain Ukrainian forces within its own borders. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, is on the ground in northeastern Ukraine and sent us this.
Imagine waking up to this. Firefighters in action after a blast tore through a car park by a row of apartment blocks early in the morning. A reminder that Russia's war in Ukraine hasn't gone away, even as Ukrainian forces push further into Russian land. Local officials say this was a Russian missile strike. Shocked residents inspect the ruins of their cars and recall what happened.
It was terrifying, a feeling of helplessness, knowing you can't do anything. Everything was burning.
Olena believes Moscow is retaliating against the city of Sumy for Kyiv's invasion of the next-door Kursk region, but she still supports Ukraine's offensive.
Let the Russians know what it feels like to wake up at 4 in the morning, gather their children's belongings and run, not knowing where to go.
2 people were injured in the explosion. Everyone appears traumatised. Nastia says these window blinds saved her life by stopping the glass from smashing over her and her boyfriend as they slept.
I'm happy to be alive because, as usual, I sleep at this side to window.
She says she needs to get away from here to recover.
I want to live in this city in Ukraine, but it's bad memories this place for me, and I don't know what to do in the future.
Yeah, what do you wish for?
I wish for, of course, peace.
No sign of that for now. A missile caused the damage here, and there's also been a significant increase in attacks from glide bombs since Ukraine launched its invasion into Russia. In fact, while we were at this site, the air alert went off and we had to move away because Russian aircraft were in the sky. But on the Russian side of the border, it's the Ukrainians on the attack. They even brought a group of journalists in on a brief tour. The arrow to the right points in the direction of Sudzha, a newly captured Russian town. On the roadside, the carcasses of war. A common sight in Ukraine now littering Russian soil. Inside the town, a statue of the former Soviet leader Lenin stands damaged in an assault that happened on Vladimir Putin's watch. A global nuclear power no longer in control of all its land. For civilians here, as in Ukraine, there's fear. The poster reads, "Peaceful people in the basement. There are no soldiers." This is the reality of Kyiv's desire to bring Moscow's war home. A battered sign by the border points to both Russia and Ukraine. But no one knows which way this war will end. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, northeastern Ukraine.
Now, over 100 firefighters spent this afternoon tackling a fire at Somerset House, a large venue in London housing several priceless works of art. It's not yet known what the cause of the fire was, but plumes of smoke could be seen across the city. Matthew Thompson has the story.
A London icon ablaze. Smoke billows from the roof of Somerset House, which for over 2 centuries has stood proudly on the banks of the Thames, even surviving a direct hit during the Blitz. Firefighters rushed to the scene. At its peak, 125 battled the blaze. The entire venue had to be closed, a major dance contest cancelled.
Initially, we were like, oh no, we're just coming out, it's a fire drill. And then it started becoming a bit serious, we started seeing fire trucks and stuff like that. So I think everyone was a bit like, oh no, is this still going to happen? Is it not going to happen? So yeah, it was kind of scary, but like they handled it really, really well.
By early evening, the fire was dying out. An investigation into the cause is underway.
It's too early to comment on the building's condition, but I think thanks to the efforts of the emergency services, I'm confident that the damage is to one small part of the building. As the London Fire Brigade continue their investigations and operations, Somerset House will remain closed to the public until further notice.
Over the centuries, Somerset House has been home to almost every aspect of public life. Once a palace, it was then host to the Navy and the Royal Society. As a store of national archives, including marriages, it was even the scene for the divorce of then Prince Charles and Princess Diana. Now an arts venue, it continues to play a key role in the cultural life of the capital, hosting London Fashion Week. And it's home to a priceless art collection, including paintings by the likes of Vincent van Gogh. Thankfully, the fire was nowhere near such treasures. In all, a swift response by the London Fire Brigade appears to have averted disaster. But now, as the embers die down, the true cost will be added up. Matthew Thompson, Sky News.
Now, medical experts are warning it is quite likely that the new Mpox strain is now in the UK. The latest outbreak of the disease is causing concern among global health officials, with this new variant being more transmissible, already causing close to 600 deaths in 13 countries across Africa. Now, outside of the continent, so far only Sweden and Pakistan have confirmed cases. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
Haroon Tulane is watching the spread of Mpox with dread. He was one of the first patients in Britain to become infected during the last global outbreak of the virus in 2022. It nearly killed him.
That 11 days at the hospital was probably the most devastating times of my life. I've never been in such pain all my life. My whole body was aching. I wasn't able to eat or drink or swallow. From then to now, it triggers some memories in me. I don't want to be that level of sick again in my life.
I came to see Haroon 2 years ago, just after he'd been discharged from hospital, but he was still isolating.
It was very scary. I thought that I'm by myself. I can't do this alone.
The variant of Mpox that is spreading right now is, we think, much more infectious than the strain that Haroon contracted in July 2022. We know from our experience with COVID that it's extremely difficult to try and contain these kinds of outbreaks. We know it's already in Europe, spread from Africa, and it's almost inevitable that it will get to the UK. In Central Africa, this outbreak has already claimed over 570 lives and infected more than 17,000 people. Pregnant women, young children, and anyone with underlying health conditions is most at risk. Mpox can be passed on from person to person through any close physical contact with Mpox blisters or scabs, or by touching clothing, bedding or towels used by someone with Mpox, or through the coughs or sneezes of a person infected with the virus. It usually takes between 5 and 21 days for the first symptoms to appear, and these can include a fever, a headache, and muscle aches. A rash usually appears 1 to 5 days later.
I think it's quite likely that cases are already in other countries in Europe, and including the United Kingdom, but we won't necessarily know for a while.
Haroon says there was a shortage of available Mpox vaccines in 2022, particularly for high-risk groups like men who have sex with men. But the advice for vaccinations this time has changed.
There is vaccine available in the UK, and currently it will be mainly used in the context of post-exposure prophylaxis and will not be given in advance to people travelling to countries.
This is the second Mpox global health emergency in as many years. It's hoped the lessons learned then can help to minimise the risk now. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Some of the day's other news now, and the US National Tsunami Warning Center has issued an alert after a magnitude 7 earthquake struck off the coast of Kamchatka Peninsula in eastern Russia. According to the European Mediterranean Seismology Center, the quake occurred at a depth of 51 kilometres. The earthquake could be felt over 60 miles away from the epicenter. A 16-year-old boy has appeared in court charged with the stabbing of an army chaplain. Father Paul Murphy was attacked outside the Renmore barracks in Galway on Thursday. His injuries are serious but not thought to be life-threatening. The boy has been remanded in custody. The leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, earned more in a month for his presenting role on GB News than MPs earn in a year. Parliamentary records show he made more than £97,000 a month last year while appearing on the channel, and another £4,000 a month writing for the Daily Telegraph. That makes his yearly income more than £1.2 million. A private funeral service has been held for one of the 3 young girls murdered in the Southport attack last month. 6-year-old BB King was stabbed while attending a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. Well-wishers were encouraged to light candles in her memory. Now, some of the toughest sentences yet have been handed down for those involved in riots which spread to parts of the country following those attacks in Southport. Jail terms in excess of 4 years have been given out in some cases, but a fortnight on, divisions are still being felt. Our communities correspondent Becky Johnson has been to Hull, which saw some of the worst violence, to bring 2 people from 2 sides together in a frank face-to-face discussion.
This is Amanj Jamil. He's lived and worked here in Hull for 24 years, since arriving as an asylum seeker from Iraq. We've invited him to meet the man who organised the demo that led to racist violence in the city earlier this month.
How are you doing?
Right.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I was in the mosque on that day.
Police tried to hold back a mob as they hurled things towards the mosque where Amanj worships.
I'm really sorry for what happened to you and to your community within that mosque. What happened was my vigil of my process got hijacked.
Hijacked?
I didn't.
You didn't know that's going to happen. But at the end of the day, you organised it.
John moved to Hull years ago from London. He's worked with stroke survivors after having strokes himself.
But if you're going to come to this country and try and impose and demand...
This was him in a Stop the Boats T-shirt leading the rally that day.
Pillage and kill. Do one. I don't want you here.
There were teddies and flowers on the flag. People have been asked to bring them in memory of the 3 girls killed in Southport.
The situation started because of the Southport, or we just had enough of the...
No, it wasn't just about that. Basically, what happened was I've actually been protesting against the state of the country.
Yes.
For quite a while now.
And not knowing that diversity built the country.
Yeah.
As the protests that day turned violent, a large crowd made their way to a migrant hotel in Hull city centre. Riot police attempted to protect it, but they too were attacked before hotel windows were smashed.
What's the issue with the asylum seekers and refugees coming there?
This is what people are being told.
Yes.
They're being told they're taking up the 4-star hotels, they're being rewarded, they're being housed, they're being fed, and they're not vetted. We don't know each other.
We don't.
Our communities don't mix with your communities don't mix with our...
We do mix,
well,
but I've got so many English friends.
That's going to go in a minute, mate.
Not far from where Amanj lives, tyres were set on fire as the riot spread and cars were set alight before the mob made their way to the mosque. This is a post that was circulated ahead of the demo, including a whole list of things that John and his supporters say they're fed up with, something I was keen to ask him about. In an advert that was on social media for the protest, it also talked about terror attacks by an alien religion. Are you talking about Islam?
Yeah.
So when you put things like that, are you surprised when people go and attack a mosque?
No, I am.
The organisers of demos that took place around the country and their ideology are now being scrutinised. John accepts he has a history of association with the now defunct English Defence League. Would you describe yourself as far right?
No.
You do run the Hull Patriotic Protesters group.
Yes, I do, yes.
And that group says it's there to protest against the influx of illegal invaders. Is that not the language of the far right?
When I set that group up, there was a lot of stuff coming out from Parliament about an invasion, right? I forget the politicians that were saying it, but everyone was calling it an invasion. On reflection now, I don't think it's the best choice of words. But you need to be fair as well, Becca. You need to be fair because every single one of my posts, I always say black, brown and white unite. Yeah. I don't like racists, I don't like Nazis, I don't want violence, I don't want riots.
The message you put it in, it kind of trigger things for other people. I understand the message clearly. It says, let's go attack them.
And have you got any more protests planned?
No, I don't really think this city needs that at the moment.
On that, these two men agree, despite the very different outlooks they have. At the end, they exchanged numbers, each respecting the other for taking the time to talk. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Hull.
OK, let's take a look at the sport now. Here's James.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Well, our Olympic odyssey is almost at an end. For Team GB, it is over. No more sport. The medals have been won. 65 in total. 14 gold, 22 silver, 29 bronze. That places them 7th in the medal table. Now, the medal range was set for them by UK Sport. They distribute public money, so you have to get bang for buck. 50 to 70 medals. So they've got 65, so they're in the range. The idea is to get about a third of them being gold, and they are down on the golds they got at Tokyo. 14 this time. They're 8 down from what they got 3 years ago in Japan. Speaking with both UK Sport and the BOA, they're going to look into this, see if there was failure to convert. That's what they'll look at. They go through things because taxpayers, your money, is at stake here. So that's the only disappointment, I think, from things where the amount of medals they've got, they're happy with. Where they're irritated with, though, is the medal table. The way it works with the IOC is the medal table's done on golds won first. They've ended up 7th, and that's irritated Team GB a bit because they're behind Australia. That's the one that's irritated them. However, if you go to America, to our colleagues at NBC, they do the medal table differently. It's on overall medals won. USA sit top of that one, unsurprisingly. Team GB are in 3rd. However, it is 7th the way they sit. I'm going to bring in Miriam Walker-Khan. Miriam here now. You've been, last 7, 8, 9 days, you seem to be a permanent resident at the Stade de France for the athletics because so much focus has been on that. Mim, in terms of Team GB, track and field, Paris 2024, success?
I think it's been a mixed result. I think Keely Hodgkinson's gold in the 800 metres has been a huge highlight. The first gold for Team GB's women since Jess Ennis-Hill in 2012, which I think sums up how big a moment that is. The first in the 800 since Kelly Holmes. And I think just being in the stadium and listening to the roar of that crowd, it felt like a home games, it felt a bit like London. That was incredible. And then Josh Kerr with that silver in their 1500 metres. Everyone thought it was going to be a battle between him and Jakob Ingebrigtsen. We were really excited for that, weren't we? And it wasn't. It was Cole Hocker from the USA who got that gold and shocked everyone in one of the most exciting.
That was brilliant, wasn't it?
Yeah, incredible. No one saw it coming. We actually thought they'd been lapped because they just felt like they came from nowhere, those two Americans. So incredible in that 1500 metres. And I think excitingly, Josh Kerr said afterwards when we spoke to him that he wasn't ready for that rivalry with Jakob Ingebrigtsen to end. So that is not the last we've seen of that, which is great, I think, for the sport and everyone who watches it. And then Matt Hudson-Smith as well, getting that silver in the 400 metres, so close to a gold, but just the greatest finish in that last 100 metres.
Hall, that was bonkers,
incredible,
wasn't it? Yeah.
ridiculous, nothing that I've ever seen in a 400 metres before. And then finally, Kat Johnson-Thompson getting her Olympic gold medal, her first Olympic silver, her first Olympic medal in that heptathlon against Nafi Thiam, who is just a legend of the sport. Kat's been to 4 Olympics, and it's a...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Thank you for that, James. And sticking with the sport theme, Team GB had an event in Manchester this evening after their success at the Paris Olympics. They won 65 medals at the Games, beating their tally from Tokyo by 1. Our North of England correspondent Fraser Maud was there.
It's been an incredible evening here in Manchester at the official homecoming event for Team GB after what has been a fantastic Olympics. 65 medals have been won, the same as we won back in London 2012 in 18 different sports, 131 different medalists. So many of them have been here tonight, swapping the track or the pool or the trampoline even for the red carpet and getting a little bit of the celebrity showbiz lifestyle that they so deserve after an incredible sporting achievement over in Paris. Of course, we had to speak to the golden girl of British athletics, Keely Hodgkinson, after her success in the 800 metres, and we asked her that dreaded question about looking forward to LA in 4 years' time.
It begins again, the 4-year cycle to the Games. Obviously, I have other championships in between. We have World Championships, European Championships, but yeah, ultimately, we'll go again in 4 years' time to try and defend my Olympic title.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we're going to take our first look at tomorrow's papers in our press preview. Tonight, we're joined by Nancy Fielder, Editor-in-Chief at National World, and Christian Calgi, Senior Political Correspondent at The Daily Express. Among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Sunday Telegraph. Extreme misogyny to be treated as terrorism. We'll be right back.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. A Hamas leader has told Sky News that the White House is exaggerating the success of the ceasefire talks as tensions on Israel's border with Lebanon escalate. A Russian missile strike has hit the Ukrainian city of Sumy as Zelensky's forces continue their incursion inside Russia. And a fire at the arts venue Somerset House has been put out by over 100 firefighters. Hello, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half an hour, we're going to see what is making headlines with Nancy Fielder, Editor-in-Chief at National World, and Christian Calgi, Senior Political Correspondent at the Daily Express. Guys, thanks for being with us. Let's see what is on some of those front pages, and we'll start with the Sunday Express, which claims the Chancellor has buried a report alleging to show the impact of axing winter fuel payments for pensioners. The Sunday Times reports from the front line in Kursk as the Ukrainian counterattack continues. The Sunday Telegraph says extreme misogyny is to be treated as terrorism as the Home Secretary unveils plans to combat online radicalisation of young men. The Observer says Labour will end the blame culture aimed at people out of work. And the Mail on Sunday is running an exclusive on how pay increases for GPs, nurses, teachers and other workers could leave Britain with a £14 billion bill. And a reminder, by scanning the QR code you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us. As I said, tonight we're joined by Nancy Fielder and Christian Calvi. Nancy, Christian, thanks both for giving up your Saturday evening to be with us. We do appreciate it. Let's get straight into it and start with the Daily Mail. Nancy, why don't you take us through this reporting here? The headlines, we can see £14 billion bill for Keir's shabby union cave-in.
Isn't it interesting how the papers have shifted so quickly when Labour has moved from opposition? No, it was almost instant. So this is obviously the right-wing Mail saying it's going to be an absolute disaster to pay normal people in normal jobs, in jobs that are all in crisis. We can't get enough teachers, we can't get enough nurses, we can't get enough GPs, but why would we want to pay them fairly? That's basically the line. They're talking as if we are going to cripple the country by paying these people who... It's very much talking about the unions. It's the enemy. They're not normal people. We're not related to these people. They're not everyday people who are actually struggling with the cost of living crisis, just like all of us. I think it's very divisive, this debate, because I think if you're on less, then you would wonder why a GP needs to be paid more. But I think we've absolutely got to remember that our public services are on their knees and we cannot recruit people into these roles that we absolutely vitally need to fill. And
Christian, look, I think in the writing of this, I think the word could soar by 40% is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. I mean, and we already know that I think about £10 billion has been set aside for these public sector pay deals.
Yeah, exactly. So Rachel Reeves is said to have set aside £10 billion, but the Mail suggests, based on their current approach, which is caving in and giving the unions whatever they ask for, we set with GPs, nurses, teachers and other workers that are set to potentially strike, could lead to that 10 billion actually being gone over by 40% up to 14 billion. And I think this is such prime fertile territory, I mean, for critics of the government, because it's all very well for Labour to say, yes, of course there's a cost to not having these people in work and a cost of strikes. But there's a real concern here that this is going to fuel further strikes, because the unions are going to look at the way that they've capitulated and rolled over. And, we've already seen junior doctors planning strikes for next year now that their demands for this year have been met. So this is not going to put an end to strikes. In many ways, it will pause them for the moment, but fuel further demands in a year when the unions feel they can get away with it. And I also think, not to sound like a defender of Liz Truss, but I can see why she's pretty aggrieved at the moment that the markets seem to be reacting in a much more measured and calm way at this sort of lavish, unfunded spending by Labour than they did with her plans a couple of years ago.
We're not going to analyse Liz Truss's feelings on the show, but I will get you to continue the debate about the paying of these wages. Look, the Labour government had never promised there was going to be loads of money, but it was always assumed that the unions would get what they wanted. And as Christian is saying now, some of the deals have been done, some of them aren't even finalised, and yet more and more groups of workers are coming out asking for more money when we know there's a £20 billion black hole in the public finances.
But why are they doing that? Why are we in this position where, and let's not forget, this was not a strike-free past couple of years. It's been an absolute disaster for the country. So what is the alternative? Do we continue to not pay them so we can't recruit into the jobs, so the public services keep collapsing around them? Or does the new government try and find a way forward, which the previous government absolutely failed to do and left us in this utter mess?
Well,
it's been a disaster so far.
I think the solution really was what the previous government was aiming for, which was, yes, we will negotiate pay, but that has to be hand in hand with reforms around working practices and getting greater productivity. In return for that, these deals, as Aslef said the other day, have come with no strings attached. So we're not getting anything back, and there are some very arcane working practices within these industries that are well past their sell-by date, and Labour's not getting any guarantees for reform on that. And arguably, yes, of course there were strikes, and I totally appreciate that pay has been flatlining for too long. But, of course, the unions had a major incentive to keep strikes going for longer than they needed to because they knew an election was round the corner, and if they could get Labour in, they could get much more for fewer demands for reform in their sector.
They didn't get Labour in. The country voted for Labour because they didn't want to vote for the much weaker alternative. And you cannot possibly, after more than a decade and years, say, no, this is what we're aiming for. They had their chance. They massively failed. And Labour is now, whoever come in, this is the mess they were dealt with. And we have to move it forward. I can't bear this conversation after less than 2 months of Tories kind of going, ooh, let's do it this way. You had your chance. You messed it up.
All right.
Well, I think the government tried. They succeeded in certain sectors. They clearly failed with the. They managed to get some of the strikes down. They clearly didn't with others. And I think that the barons were clearly incentivised to keep the pain going until the election to help Labour, and then they got what they wanted.
Not the barristers sort, but that was quite a long time ago. I'm trying to think of recent strikes that managed to get sorted. But the barristers one, that was about 6 or maybe even a year ago. Anyway, let's move on. Good talk. Let's look at the Sunday Express. Christian, this is your paper.
Yes.
Talk us through the reporting here.
So we launched a campaign this week to try and force Rachel Reeves to reverse her decision on winter fuel payments for pensioners. And the Sunday Times have picked up the baton, and what they have reported is that Rachel Reeves is in possession of an official report looking at what this policy move may do in terms of excess winter debts due to pensioners having to choose between heating or eating as they lose that £300 winter fuel allowance. And so they say she has this report. She ordered officials to draw it up, but now it's not being published. It's either being hidden on or lost somewhere in the Treasury. And critics say that she's either being reckless here or has something to hide. And the government spokesperson notably sort of dodged the answering whether this report exists. We're hoping to build on it. We'll be much more reporting over the coming weeks, but there does seem to be a sizable amount of cross-party opposition. We're yet to see anyone really in Labour go public, though we know that Labour MPs are privately voicing these concerns to the Chancellors, but we've had Lib Dems, we've had Greens, Plaid, SNP. So that's what we're trying to do over the coming weeks.
And just to be really clear about who's going to lose this, is people who aren't getting their means-tested benefits, right, who are going to lose their winter fuel allowance. And the argument that is made that is some pensioners, not all, but some pensioners can well afford to pay their own heating bills in the winter and don't need what can be up to a £300 payment into their accounts every year.
That is definitely true. Not everybody needs this, but there are, I believe, quite a few people who do need it who will lose it. And I think also we've got to remember the scale of fear around winters when they arrive, and no fault of the present government, but the huge amounts of people who actually already died because they were too scared. They were on their own, elderly, and too scared to turn on the heating. The choice between heating and eating is not a new one. It's absolutely devastating that one of the richest countries in the world, ourselves, are in this situation. But this is not something that Labour supporters are taking easily. It would be great if people don't need the money, but actually we've got to be really careful to make sure that those do still get it.
What do we think about the politics of it? That, you know, there was a lot of pressure on the Labour Party to sort out the two-child benefit cap. They chose not to do that, but then they have made quite a, I won't call it a political decision, but quite an emotive decision to get rid of the pension, the levy for pensioners.
So the thing I don't really understand is in the grand scheme of things, I mean, we've just been talking about 10, 14 billion for pay settlements, other very expensive areas of government. It looks like this change is going to save less than $1 billion once you factor in extra people who will hear the message and start claiming pension credit, extra demand on the NHS as a result of illnesses over the winter from people living in cold and damp homes. It seems like a huge amount of political pain for very little financial gain on the Treasury's Excel spreadsheets. So I just can't really understand why Labour have chosen such a divisive move so early on.
And just on this report, do you know, if it exists and it's there, please publish it. Let's not keep going with this hiding and sort of... Everybody needs to be able to see the facts and understand how government works and why.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on. We've got a couple of minutes left where we can just take a look at the front of The Observer. We're going to do the pitch story there on the front there, the fire at Somerset House. And Nancy, you got to see it up close and personal. Well, you weren't at Somerset House, but you were close by.
I wasn't at Somerset House.
Sounds suspicious when you frame it.
Having a weekend in London, I brought the kids, and I was actually doing the proper tourist thing where one of the boats came around the Thames. I was like, I'm sure there's not meant to be big black smoke billowing from a beautiful building. And as it turns out, it wasn't. I mean, it looked like an absolute devastating fire. It sounds miraculous, like it was contained in one of the parts of the buildings that wasn't housing these internationally renowned and incredibly irreplaceable paintings. But yeah, what a devastating event. Over 100 firefighters, roads closed. I mean, very dramatic for August tourists floating down the Thames and everybody else.
And of course, it had nothing to do with it. And when I heard the story this morning as well, all I could think of were the big fires that, you know, we saw in Paris and Notre Dame, and you were thinking, is this going to get worse and worse?
Yes, and hopefully when things are settled and we can properly assess the extent of the damage, hopefully it won't be really awful. But it's incredible timing, because only this week I went on a journalist behind-the-scenes tour of the sort of behind-the-scenes basement areas of the House of Commons and Parliament as part of the restoration and renewal work there, and we're constantly told that we're only one accidental small fire away from this UNESCO World Heritage Site entirely being torn apart, and seeing the state of the wiring and how everything is just falling apart down there. I mean, it's really worrying that they've managed to get it to a point where they think no one will die if there's a fire in Parliament, but they can't say anything about how the building will fare. And I really just hope that, I don't know whether it applies to Somerset House, but authorities really have to start taking big and bold decisions to spend the money and get these, you know, vital piece of national heritage saved.
Saved, exactly. All right, Christian, Nancy, thanks both for that. More from you later on. We'll continue our review of the papers, including looking at this story as to why the UK's Universities Watchdog has declared the golden age of higher education over. That is in the Sunday Times. Stay with us.
I am a soldier.
Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko are the kings of the heavyweight division.
You want to see a heavyweight destroyer?
The mayor of Kiev says things could become apocalyptic if Russia continues to strike its energy infrastructure.
It really is an extraordinary story. These are both brothers, Vladimir, the younger brother, and Vitaly, the older brother, became world heavyweight boxing champs. For about 10 years, they had pretty much all the belts between the two of them, but they never fought each other. That was part of the legend. Their mother wouldn't let them fight each other. Vitaly left boxing in 2011 and went into politics, and has been for the last 10 years the mayor of Kiev. And of course, that's been a pretty heavy-duty post for the last 2 years. And so we follow him in the present day as he's dealing with all the day-to-day issues of being mayor in a city under constant bombardment. But also we tell the story of his boxing career and how he ended up where he is. To begin with, it was quite hard because he is the kind of, he's sporting superstar. He's used to dealing with the press, batting them away. So although he'd sort of agreed, oh, what, fly-on-the-wall film, you can come anywhere, actually, he was very reserved. But then there was this terrible tragedy that happened one day where a bomb shelter was left locked accidentally, and 2 people, a woman and a child, were trying to get in, and they died in a bombardment. And this so upset him that there was a total change in his character, actually, and we happened to be there at the time. And from that moment on, he really let us in. Well, I actually think that Vitaly, has not changed that much. He's a man of few words, but incredibly charming, twinkle in his eye, much smarter than people give him credit for. I think that's his main weapon. People tend to think, oh, he's a heavyweight boxer, he's been knocked around the head, he's going to be a bit dumb. But actually, he's incredibly smart. And one of the things in the film that I think people will find fascinating is the friction there is between him and the President Zelensky. And this relationship is not a good relationship. They're competitors. And it is interesting, they both come from these celebrity backgrounds. Somebody said to me, this is the sign of an immature democracy, that Ukraine's an immature democracy because it has celebrities as its politicians. I don't know if that's the case, but I would say that they've both Zelensky and Vitaly Klitschko have done an incredible job of moving from the kind of worlds of entertainment and sport into politics.
Welcome back. You're watching The Press Preview. We're joined by Nancy Fielder, Editor-in-Chief at National World, and Christian Calgi, Senior Political Correspondent at the Daily Express. Nancy, Christian, thanks for sticking around. All right, let's look at the front of the Observer here and, the inevitability of this after all the judicial system activity in the past couple of weeks. But the headline there, riots push prison system back to the brink. Nancy, talk us through this.
I'm not sure it really needed the word back in that, because we know the prisons have been absolutely overcrowded beyond bursting point for quite a long time now. We were talking about this way before the election, and I think everybody was thinking about this when they were having the overnight courts in a system that you can't get court space quick enough. What is this going to create? But I also don't think in the atmosphere and the acts of ludicrous violence and hate that we're seeing that there was any other choice about it. Yeah. So I don't think for 1 minute that there is an easy solution here. The solution was to have kept on top of it, and it didn't happen. We are where we are. But I think probably we all felt when we saw some of the really tough sentences handed out that actually they're handed out as warnings, and they're probably not going to be served because we physically can't keep people in prison long enough.
Yeah, and this is going to be the enacting by HM Prison and Probation Service of Operation Early Dawn, which has been used before. It's used back in March, the reporting tells me, when the prisons were at capacity, and that's going to prevent inmates being taken from police cells to courts unless a prison place is available. And this is obviously then separate to the early release that's going to be happening.
Yes,
October,
which
right?
Well, that's not kicking off until, say, September, November time. I totally understand why the government and the court system has prioritised the rioters, because it was an absolutely essential tactic to get the riots to stop, to show immediately the consequence of what that behaviour would be, and by all accounts it seems to have worked very effectively. I do, however, think the government is playing and the wider legal system are playing a very risky game here, because I am concerned that some of the early releases are not going to go well. And there will be examples of people who were released early and who go on to reoffend. And that is going to be terrible for the government and for the reputation of the legal system. And whilst those involved in the physical riots are rightly prioritised and targeted, I do think that there's been an element to which people who have posted silly or offensive messages online, but that were effectively seen by no one, you know, that got 2 or 3 likes, and by that account cannot have been accused of inciting violence, I do think that they shouldn't have been prioritised in quite the same way as those actively inciting violence and those participating in the violence. And I think in that sense, the government's slightly tipped over the edge there and will be, you know, going easy on people who really deserve it with early releases and other things, and overly harshly targeting others.
Sorry, go on, Nancy.
We need to be a bit careful about saying who deserves it and who doesn't deserve it, don't we? I mean, there were some absolute hate crimes committed online, and it did need to be dealt with. But I think also a slightly separate issue is what has been done about the issues that caused this in the first place. This was a product of something that we're ignoring, we're addressing. These are bad people, they're doing bad things. I don't argue with that, but actually why? Because this has not gone away, and this has scared people into stopping for now, but it hasn't stopped the hatred, it hasn't stopped that bubbling tension, and if that isn't addressed, this is just going to get worse and worse.
Well, I was going to say the other thing that needs to be addressed are the root causes of the prison crisis, and I found it very remarkable, actually, that at no point when the government's making these very controversial announcements about early releases have they indicated any sort of new focus on building prisons, which, you know, should be hand in hand with any temporary measures that need to be taken. Prison capacity is absolutely in crisis and can only be dealt with by building more prisons.
Well, you'll know what James Simpson, the prison minister, has said about prison and about sentencing and how people perhaps spend too much time in prison. So maybe that is something that will be coming down the track, as it were, in the next few months. All right, let's move on to the Sunday Telegraph. And I'll get you to take us through the headline there, Nancy. Extreme misogyny to be treated as terrorism, the Telegraph are reporting.
Yeah, this is really interesting. This is basically saying that if it's spotted that male misogyny exists, it needs to be tackled and treated in the same way as any other form of extremism. And we know that there are male figures online who are absolutely hero-worshipped, and that they do whip up a frenzy, they pass on a level of hatred, and that often comes out in attacks on women. It's an everyday occurrence, and I think this is a really big step forward. How it will happen in reality is another one, but actually we all know that women are killed every day in this country by men. They're attacked, they're raped and they're murdered. And actually, I think this is a really positive step forward, particularly if it stops young men growing up thinking it's acceptable.
Yeah, talk us through some of the detail of it, Chris.
Yes.
It is quite interesting, the way that the new Home Secretary is planning to try and tackle this.
Yes, so anyone believed to have been radicalised into being misogynistic, sexist or violent against women or girls will now be referred to the PREVENT programme, which is the government's counter-terrorism and anti-extremism programme, in the same way that people who are perceived to have become radicalised on the right or, you know, Islamic extremism. So that will also mean teachers will be legally required to refer pupils that they suspect of extreme misogyny to PREVENT. You know, obviously, I'm not going to be in any way against any measures that deal with this, and I do agree that it's a really horrible growing problem. But goodness me, I do not envy the increased burden on teachers that I think this is going to introduce.
It's going to be a lot of work, isn't it, to try and make sure that that does have the impact that it needs to have. Right, Nancy, Christian, thanks both for that. Good talk. Speak to you again soon. Coming up on Sky News at 11, we'll have the latest from our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, who is in Lebanon, as those ceasefire talks continue to try and end the war in Gaza.